Then we get to oscillator rate scale. Let's listen to what it does. What it sounds like it's doing is it's taking away the release. It's affecting the envelope in some way. Next, we have the amp modulation sense. And since we don't have any modulation happening, I'm not entirely sure what this is doing either. Although it does change the sound. Next, we have the key velocity sense, and I'm going to assume that this has to do with the degree to which the velocity lever has an effect over an operator's application. So let's see here. We have it on 6. Can we step out? Okay. Let's have it on 0. Aha. Okay, so we can see to what degree the velocity is affecting, the velocity lever is affecting the amplitude of the operator. So it remembers the setting I last had that on. So, okay. Next, we have output level. 0 is no output. 99 is output. Next, we have oscillator mode. You have oscillator mode, which has either the ratio, which plays the pitches relatively loudly, or fixed, which I think is a fixed level, which you really can't hear. That's going to be something that needs experimentation. Okay, next is your frequency. Wait, let's go back to this and set to what we can hear. Oh, I turned the frequency up. So you can set the frequency of the oscillator. The next setting, that's a coarse frequency. This is a fine frequency. And then you can set a detune level to it. So like if it's playing with a different operator, you could have it slightly detuned to create chorusing. Let's go back and set that to more. And then detune. Okay, so we have made our way through all of the individual parameters associated with an operator. We've gone through all of what operator 1 does on its own. We can turn it on and off. We can set its amplitude envelope. We can set its level scaling if we want to emulate the behavior of acoustic instruments, or the opposite of the behavior of acoustic instruments if we want. And then we have several different settings about how it will respond to velocity and amplification and its output level, what mode it is, and then its frequency. And that's really all there is to an operator on this particular synthesizer. That's not a huge amount of things. It looks like really complicated because those abbreviations and whatever, but we're just talking about some relatively simple controls. So what's the big excitement about FM if it's just that simple? I mean, come on. It's just a sine wave with its own envelope and a few settings dealing with pitch and how it can be affected. It's really actually, and it's weird to say this, it's really actually pretty simple. Well, here's where it gets complicated, because we've got one oscillator, right? Or one operator. Let's turn on a second operator. There's our sound. Now we're going to turn on the second operator. Okay, now we have a totally different sound, a much more complex waveform. And what has happened is that operator 2 in this particular algorithm modulates the frequency of operator 1. So we can affect that. We can make a decision about when that modulation happens by diving in and going to say the rate, the envelope, the amplitude rate of the envelope associated with our modulator operator number 2. See, we can hear that modulation come in. So you can set the envelope to decide how the modulation changes over time in intensity by using that same amplitude envelope we were exploring in operator 1. We can also keep going in, and you can do the level scaling with the modulation as well, which would mean that you could control the length of the modulation over time depending on what its frequency was. Or we could go in. What happens if we mess with rate scale here? Yes, it does the same thing that it did with the frequency with the modulation. It limits its length, it sounds like. But, I mean, one of the most obvious things to do would be to go to oscillator level. See, we can turn the modulation completely off, or we can turn it completely on. So that's basically what happens with this whole synthesizer, is that you turn on an operator and decide how it's going to affect the other operators. Now, operator 2 does not necessarily have to be a modulating operator. In another algorithm, it might just be another oscillator-like operator, and they're both playing at the same time. So you could set them to different pitches and it would create different waveforms, but it wouldn't be, there wouldn't be the weird modulation in any way. It would just be like playing two oscillators together. But you can control their amplitude over time using the envelope and several other functions that we've gone through. The complexity of FM is the relationships between the different operators when we start messing with the algorithms. So we have our funny sound. Let's see what the next algorithm sounds like. They all have different relationships. And if you'll look, I'll show you the algorithms. We have this set to algorithm 1, where you can see that operator 2 is in the blue. That means it's a modulator, and it's modulating operator 1. But as we move through, you can see that relationship may change. There are places where 2 is not blue and is actually green and is not a modulator to operator 1. So that is at core, and this is really simplifying it, how FM works. You're just making decisions about these 6 operators, how they will sound, what their pitches will be, and then if they're modulating another operator, how they will be modulating that operator. And you can see that you can get modulators modulating modulators. So it gets insanely complex, but much like analog synthesis, it starts off with the basic principles. It's just how those basic principles interact that gets infinitely complex. Now, the other thing I want to talk to you about is how if we keep pressing the operator arrows here, we'll get to something past 6. And that is the global settings for the sound in general. And in those settings, you can set how the pitch of the sound, all of the different operators will change over time. It's an envelope that affects all 6 operators. So let's see if we can get it to do something weird. Oh, I think we have to go down to, if we stay in rate, we're not going to notice the difference. We have to go down to the levels. Okay. They're set at 50, and 50 is like 0. So let's hear what happens when we start messing with that. So right now we have 2 operators going. We have a pitched operator and a modulation operator. We have a carrier and a modulator, and both of their pitches are affected by this pitch envelope. So you can set interesting pitch things, and this is really effective in effects. So you can make really crazy modulated ring modulator sorts of effects here. Beyond that, we have feedback. Now, if you look back at your algorithm card, you'll see that some of the operators have a little box around them. That means that that's a feedback operator, and if you have this feedback setting up, it's going to feedback on itself and create more distorted, interesting noises. We get into next oscillator key sync, which allows you to start an oscillator at its waveform at the point that you press the key down, and you know from sort of dubstep that then you have some rhythmic effects that you can generate. Next, we have LFO delay. So if you're employing the LFO, let's turn the LFO on. And you can set a delay so that it doesn't start right away. There, you can hear it just come in there at the very end. And then we have LFO amp mod depth. I'll turn the delay back off. I'm not entirely sure what that does. And then we have LFO key sync, which then starts the LFO in the same place every time you press a key, which is helpful for rhythmic effects. We can then, this is one of my favorites. This is the LFO wave choice. 0 is triangle. 1 is saw. 2 is saw up. 3 is square. 4 is sine, which we've already kind of heard. And 5 is sample and hold. Ooh, that's cool. So that's really fun. And then we have mod sense pitch, which is another one of those ones that all of the modulation ones I'm not entirely sure about. And then last, you have the ability to transpose all of the operators together. To set where you want them to be, either pitch-wise or effect-wise. And people, that is it. You have control over the envelope, the level scale, several different output-related, modulation-related effect settings, and pitch for each operator. And then for all operators, you have control over all of the pitches and LFO and transpose, basically. So that is it. We've actually done it. We've gone through everything. Now, it seems like that's not very much, but it becomes a lot, like I said, when you have all of the different operators set to a different setting, and then you start messing with the algorithms to decide how those operators interact with each other and what role each operator plays, whether it is carrier or modulator.